New York City. The late 1980s, going into the early 1990s, it's hard to really paint the picture if you weren't there. The city wasn't just on edge, it was completely overwhelmed. It was just drowning in this flood of cocaine, cheap, incredibly pure, and the violence that came with it.
It was a total crisis of public order,
Mm-hmm.
and it was all driven by addiction, by sheer desperation. The violence had hit this horrifying new level, making everyday life feel, well, precarious.
Yeah, and we see it in the records, don't we? The source material details these just unbelievable acts.
Unbelievable. I mean, the one that always stands out is the case of the Chinese restaurant owner. He was brutally murdered by junkies. And not just for the cash in the register, but specifically for his gold teeth.
Christine.
That's how desperate they were for the money for their next fix. It's a horrifying detail.
That level of brutality, it tells you this isn't a street crime problem anymore. This is something systemic. This whole destructive machine was being run by the Colombian cartels.
Specifically Medellin, Pablo Escobar's organization, and the Cali Cartel. And they were running it with an iron fist from thousands of miles away.
And this is where the old playbook just completely falls apart, right? Standard law enforcement, it just wasn't working.
Not even close. If you look at the stats from the investigations, street-level arrests were a losing battle. The data confirmed it. For every single dealer they arrested, 2 new ones would pop up to take his place almost instantly.
It's the classic Hydra problem.
Exactly. You can cut off heads on the sidewalk all day, every day. But you're never going to stop the flow until you go for the heart of the beast itself. You have to dismantle the organization, the supply chain coming straight from South America.
Okay, so that realization that you can't just use brute force, that's what forces this major pivot from the Justice Department and local law enforcement. And that's how we get the C-13 task force.
C-13 was basically a specialized strike team, a wrecking ball. You had NYPD, FBI, DEA, Customs, all their top people in one unit. And their whole mission was to ditch the old methods and find a way to, surgically infiltrate and just destroy these massive international drug operations from the inside out.
And that brings us to the core of what we're going to talk about today. The mission they set for themselves was, well, it was probably the most audacious and personally risky operation imaginable.
To find a way, anyway, into the highest, most protected levels of Pablo Escobar's Medellin cartel, an organization known for being absolutely terrifying.
What's really incredible about this story and what we want to unpack for you in this deep dive is how much this operation stopped being police work and started being, well, theater. It was acting. It was pure psychological warfare.
We're going to trace this single year-long high-stakes undercover op led by Detective Richard Ippolito. He had to completely transform himself, body and soul, into Tony Romano, a convincing high-level member of the American Mafia.
All to trick his way right into the cartel's inner circle. We're going to break down the psychological prep, the huge logistical games they had to play, and just the sheer nerve it took for one man to survive a year inside one of the deadliest criminal enterprises on the planet.
So let's start at the beginning. Section 1. The cartel's grip and the birth of a persona. Before Detective Ippolito could even think about becoming Tony Romano, the C-13 task force was up against this almost impossible logistical problem.
The drug flow itself, how do you stop it?
Well, that was the cartel's genius. They completely understood the power of volume, the sheer scale of global trade. I mean, think about it. New York's port processes something like 5,000 shipping containers every single day.
5,000 a day?
Yeah. The cartels didn't need every shipment to get through. They just needed to be good enough at hiding their product to make finding it impossible. They leveraged that massive volume against law enforcement.
And the investigation showed they were incredibly sophisticated. This wasn't just, taping a few kilos to the bottom of a truck.
Oh no. This was a masterclass in concealment. It was designed from the ground up to be a needle in a haystack problem, but the haystack is the size of a metropolis.
So what were some of the methods?
They were pioneering ways to completely bypass detection. For instance, they were dissolving pure cocaine, liquefying it, and then hiding it in bottles that look like legitimate industrial chemicals or alcohol.
Right, and pressing it into solid objects.
Exactly. Pressing it into things that look like everyday commercial goods. We've all heard the stories about the domino bricks, right? They'd color the cocaine and press it into these dense ceramic-looking dominoes or plastic toys.
And the food products, that detail always gets me because it shows they understood the psychology of customs checks. I mean, who is going to meticulously inspect a giant pallet of imported food?
No one has the time. They were packaging the drugs in factory-sealed cans of guava paste, tins of pickled peaches, even bags of imported coffee. If you've got a container with 20,000 kilos of legitimate freight, a customs officer simply cannot justify opening testing every single can of fruit.
The time and the cost would be astronomical.
It's an effective barrier. It just is.
So if you can't find it physically because of the volume and the clutter concealment, how do you even start to breach that wall?
You go after the human element. You have to find reliable, deeply connected informants.
That's the only way in.
It's the absolute bridge to high-level intelligence. The task force knew that if they could build trust with someone inside or connected to the inside, that relationship could open doors that port searches never could. And for C-13, that bridge finally appeared in December of 1991.
And that came through Eppolito's informant, who made the introduction to a man named Eduardo.
Right. And Eduardo, at first glance, wasn't some major player. He was a pretty small-time operator. His specialty was cloned cell phones.
But his value wasn't the phones, it was his connections.
Exactly, his pedigree. He was connected, even if it was loosely, to the Medellin cartel's infrastructure in New York.
And this small connection, this cloned cell phone dealer, was the crack in the armor that Eppolito and C-13 needed.
Because what they figured out pretty quickly was that the cartel, for all its power, had a weakness, an Achilles heel, and that was logistics inside the United States.
It's interesting. So they had the supply, the labs, the muscle.
Everything. But they struggled with that final mile, getting their products safely through the heavily regulated, very sensitive American ports. That's where they were vulnerable.
Okay, so why the mafia? If they have that much money, enough to move tons of product, why not just bribe some customs agents or longshoremen? Why specifically seek out a partnership with the American mafia?
That is a fantastic question, and it's critical. The investigation showed it wasn't about simple bribery. It was about sophisticated systems control. The mafia had spent decades, often through their control of unions and their historical contacts, operating inside the port systems.
They knew the rhythm of the place.
They knew the flow, the inspection schedules, the specific tricks you needed to use to divert a container or clear it without flagging federal attention. They had institutionalized access and a layer of protection that a newly bribed official just couldn't offer.
So it's a synergy of criminal expertise. The Colombians have the product, but they need the mafia's operational security on the ground in the U.S.
And who better to provide that than a high-level mafioso, Tony Romano? That was Ippolito's way in. That was the entire strategy.
That first meeting with Eduardo, then, must have been incredibly tense.
Fraught with risk.
Mm.
Ippolito treated it as a pure psychological test. The C-13 team was meticulous. They had agents inside and outside the bar, every exit covered. But Ippolito's main job was to project absolute calm. And, crucially, not to rush into talking about drugs.
He played it cool. He established caution from the get-go.
He did. He didn't lead with, hey, can you get me cocaine? He led with a smaller, unrelated cloned phone deal. He projected this image of strength and business savvy, basically saying, look, I don't know you. Let's do this small deal first. If it goes well, if you prove you're legit, then maybe we can talk about something bigger.
It's brilliant. It's exactly how organized crime itself operates, cautious, hierarchical.
It forced Eduardo to respect him. It established Romano as the one in control, the one who didn't desperately need the deal. And that initial transaction went smoothly, which cemented the trust they needed to move to the next step.
Which was a small drug deal just to test the waters.
A very small order to maintain that credibility. Just 1 kilogram of cocaine.
And that single kilo was the key.
It was the key piece of evidence that confirmed the whole investigation was on the right track. They tested it immediately, and the results were definitive. The purity was extremely pure, over 90%.
Okay, so explain for us why 90% purity is such a smoking gun. Why does that scream direct cartel connection?
It's because of a term you hear a lot. Punched. Cocaine starts at that super high purity in the source labs in Colombia. But every time it changes hands on its way to the street, every middleman punches it.
They cut it with other substances to increase their profit.
Right. They cut it with baking soda, talc, whatever they have. It reduces the purity dramatically. By the time it hits the street, it might be, 30% pure if you're lucky? 90% meant this stuff hadn't been touched. It came straight from the cartel's labs.
So Eduardo wasn't just some guy. He was a gatekeeper.
He was a verified gatekeeper with direct access to the high-level smugglers C-13 was after. And just like that, the operation went from 0 to 100.
With Eduardo now validated, the stakes just immediately shoot up, which takes us into Section 2. Escalation, lineage, and the art of deception. Eduardo doesn't waste any time bringing Ippolito closer to the core.
No, he introduces him to a woman who's using the alias Monica, which, In that world, aliases are standard procedure.
Of course.
Ippolito's team observed this meeting very closely. They identified her as someone they'd seen at Eduardo's place before, but more importantly, they also spotted a lookout, a man watching the meeting from a distance.
Checking for surveillance.
Right, checking for cops or rival gangs. Standard practice.
And this spotter and Monica were eventually identified as Rocio Londago and Gustavo Valencia, who went by Willie.
Exactly. And that's when C-13 runs the background checks.
Yeah.
And they find a connection that must have just stopped them cold.
The Escobar connection.
Willie, Gustavo Valencia, was a distant cousin of Pablo Escobar.
Wow.
I mean, just think about the gravity of that for a second. They hadn't just reached a distribution arm of the Medellin cartel. They had infiltrated the actual family structure of the most powerful and ruthless drug lord on the entire planet.
This changes everything. This isn't just a win for C-13, it's a huge risk inversion. Suddenly, they're not chasing the cartel anymore. The cartel is coming to them, relying on this man they think is a mafioso. The whole power dynamic just flips.
It flips completely, but it also means the margin for error is now zero. Absolutely zero. Lieutenant Mike Garrity, one of the supervisors, is on record saying that normally they have to work their way up from point A to point Z, just painstakingly climbing the ladder.
But Willie was different.
Willie represented a potential free pass to the highest level, which meant Ippolito was now operating in a world where a mistake wasn't just, oh, the operation failed. It was a death sentence, authorized by a blood relative of the cartel's chief. The Tony Romano persona had to be perfect, impenetrable.
So how do you do that? How do you build a fake criminal identity that can withstand that level of scrutiny? This is way beyond just putting on a nice suit and practicing an accent.
This was C-13 going into full theatrical production mode. It was biographical fabrication on an intense level.
They created a whole life for him.
A total immersion. They built a detailed false identity for Tony Romano, complete with a long, verifiable criminal record. A paper trail that could stand up to at least a casual check by the cartel.
But the internal transformation was just as important, right? To sell the idea he could move tons of drugs, he had to actually sound the part.
He couldn't just say he had contacts at the port. He had to sound like he knew the port better than the guys who worked there every day.
Which meant he needed that crash course in international transport and customs. What kind of specifics did he have to master?
Oh, everything. The jargon, the rhythm, the bureaucratic weak points. He had to know the difference between a high-security bolt seal on a container and a standard cable seal. He had to understand bills of lading, manifest systems, where cargo gets stored, inspection protocols.
Like the difference between an X-ray scan and a physical inspection.
Precisely. He had to be able to talk confidently about how you divert a container that was flagged for an intensive exam without sounding like he was reading it out of a textbook. It had to be second nature.
So it's not just about looking tough, it's about technical competence. And he had to physically transform, too. The whole aesthetic had to match the part.
He needed the swagger. Ippolito himself said the role demanded a chic car and expensive jewelry. The visible signs of success that organized crime respects.
And he had a bit of a head start, right? He grew up around that kind of world.
A little bit, yeah. He grew up around petty criminals, so the general speech pattern, the mannerisms, he had access to that.
Yeah.
But he needed that sophisticated overlay, that loose script that let him improvise within the character he'd built.
And this is all happening under this constant, suffocating threat. We have to just pause and remember what happens when an undercover agent gets unmasked in that world.
It's the ultimate fear. The ghost of Special Agent Enrique Amarena, who was kidnapped in 1985, tortured and brutally murdered by a Mexican drug gang. That was always there. For Ippolito, a gun was part of the job. Guns are normal for a gangster.
But being found out as a cop.
That was the ultimate betrayal in their eyes. Carrying a wire, a hidden camera that ensures a gruesome end. The primary fear wasn't the bullet. It was the discovery of the microphone.
But the task force had this incredible kind of subtle advantage they discovered, of vulnerability in Monica and Willie that they could exploit.
Yes. And this was the secret ingredient that really accelerated the whole operation. The investigators found out that Monica and Willie weren't operating from a position of strength. They were effectively in disgrace with the cartel.
What does that mean, in disgrace?
They'd lost money, they'd had a previous drug shipment intercepted, and as a result, they owed the cartel a massive, unforgiving debt.
And a debt to the cartel is a ticking clock on your life.
It's more than a ticking clock. It's a direct threat to them and their families. So they were desperate. Desperate for Tony Romano to be the real deal. Desperate to prove they could run this big new American route. And most of all, desperate to pay back that debt.
So their desperation made them take bigger risks.
Higher risks, and they were less skeptical of Romano's grand claims about having the port in his pocket. Their vulnerability played directly and massively into the task force's hands.
So the very people C-13 is trying to catch are the ones pushing the operation forward out of desperation. But as the deals got bigger, the task force knew the cartel wouldn't keep sending mid-level contacts. They were about to meet the real muscle. And that brings us to Section 3. The threat deepens. Enforcers and logistical challenges.
This is where the risk level just skyrockets. It goes from dangerous to genuinely existential. Because the cartel sends in Magola. And Magola, while she presented as this very polished, attractive woman, she carried the weight of absolute terror in her family tree.
She was the niece of Ivan the Terrible.
Yes. And we need to be clear about who Ivan the Terrible was. That wasn't just some colorful nickname for a tough guy.
No.
The records confirm he was one of the cartel's highest-level, most feared assassins, a state-sanctioned enforcer. He was notorious for murdering about 19 police officers in Colombia. He operated with complete impunity against the state.
And the detail that really sticks with you.
He had his own private torture chamber on his estate in Bogota. So Ippolito is now being personally vetted by the niece of a man who specializes in torture and high-level political assassination.
The pressure in that room must have been immense, and the tension was immediate, wasn't it?
Oh, it was. The reports from the operation highlight this moment where Ippolito has to make a split-second life-or-death choice. He sees that one of Magola's escorts is visibly armed.
He's carrying a gun.
A concealed weapon, but Ippolito spots it. And he chooses not to call for backup, not to react at all. Any subtle sign, any flicker of recognition that he saw the gun would have exposed him. He had to risk his own life, relying only on the strength of his Tony Romano persona to protect the whole operation.
And that really speaks to the professionalism of the C-13 team. They had protocols for everything, especially for managing surveillance.
They were playing three-dimensional chess. For example, if Ippolito's backup team outside thought they were being watched by cartel lookouts, a constant risk, they didn't just scatter. That would signal panic.
Right.
Instead, they had a protocol where they would subtly back away, making it look like the gangster just saw a shadow. A random person walking by, a car turning a corner, something that wasn't a threat. It maintained the illusion of total normalcy.
And to reinforce that illusion of a legitimate mafia business, C-13 went all out. They created a fake office for Tony Romano in Floral Park, Queens.
That office was critical. It wasn't just a meeting spot. It was a fully controlled stage. It was wired all around. Every corner had a hidden camera or microphone to collect evidence. Every word, every handshake, every agreement was documented so the case would be airtight.
And they had a supporting cast. FBI Special Agent Mary Satzer played his secretary.
Her role was huge. She wasn't just answering phones. She provided this convincing layer of bureaucracy and normalcy to Romano's criminal world. Her being there made him seem like a busy, legitimate businessman.
And Ippolito used her brilliantly.
Oh, absolutely. He'd stage these urgent phone calls in the middle of meetings with the gangsters. He'd grab the phone and bark orders, like, "The order must go out tomorrow. Fax that immediately to the port." It just reinforced this image of him as a powerful, high-level operator with a lot on his plate.
The logistics of keeping this all going just got more and more complex, which culminates in what has to be the most audacious part of the whole deception, the Atlantic City ruse.
Yes. Ippolito had to explain why he'd be unavailable for days at a time. So he created a cover story that he had essential mafia business down in Atlantic City.
And of course, Monica and Willie, who are still desperate to verify their new partner, demand to go with him.
And C-13 couldn't say no. Refusing would look suspicious. But that meant they had to build this entire elaborate lie, a believable reality, from scratch.
Right.
If this failed, Romano was exposed in an insecure location far from his primary backup.
The task force just pulled out all the stops. They coordinated with casinos in New Jersey. They set up the entire scene.
The interagency cooperation was incredible. Ippolito played the boss for the weekend. But it's the little details that sold it. The task force had another undercover agent play a different high-ranking mafioso.
Right.
And when this mafioso met Romano in the casino in front of Willie and Monica, he made a big show of it. He embraced him, kissed him on both cheeks, that classic sign of respect, and then very publicly handed him a thick envelope stuffed with cash.
And Ippolito knew exactly how to play the moment. He didn't just quietly pocket the money.
No, he made a performance out of it. He started counting the cash right there at the table, loudly complaining that he's always working, even when he's supposed to be taking a weekend off. It was pure theater.
And it was designed to do one thing.
Completely convince Willie and Monica that they were dealing with the absolute real deal. And the records confirm it worked perfectly. They were totally awestruck. They bought it, hook, line, and sinker.
The success in Atlantic City cements the trust, but the cartels always demand one final test, a test of pure will. And this leads us into Section 4, the ultimate test of will.
This is where the cartel brings out their final verification tool, their ace in the hole, a man named Sammy.
And Sammy wasn't a logistics guy.
No. Sammy was the cartel's dedicated enforcer. His specialty was counterintelligence. He was trained specifically to unmask undercover agents and test people's loyalty under extreme pressure.
The showdown with Sammy happens in a hotel room, and the tension is just off the charts. Ippolito knows his team is right next door, ready to breach, but his life depends entirely on his performance in that room.
Sammy starts the interrogation. He pushes Ippolito on his criminal resume, demanding specifics about his life, his history, and then he asks the ultimate gangland test question.
How many of you had killed?
Yeah. And that question's a perfect trap, isn't it? If you say too few, you look weak, unimportant. If you say too many, you might contradict the fake history they built for you, and the lie is exposed.
It's a psychological minefield.
It is. And Ippolito realized this was an interview. It was a test designed to push him past his rehearsed lines and force a mistake. And this is where his nerve and his ability to improvise just shine. He doesn't answer the question.
He flips the script.
He flips the entire script. Ippolito stands up, and instead of defending himself, he goes on the attack. He accuses Sammy of being a cop or an agent for asking such a dangerous, specific question.
Wow, the sheer audacity of that.
He implies that only a rat, only an informant, would ask for details that could trace back to a boss's past crimes. He turned all the pressure right back onto the cartel's enforcer.
He had to. He basically ends the conversation, forces the confrontation.
He does. He puts his hand out and says, "Here's my hand. Either you shake it or I do business with someone else."
Yeah.
It was a classic display of mob strength. It said, "I am the boss here. You don't question me."
And we have to imagine that moment of silence. The whole operation, his life, is hanging in the balance, waiting for Sammy's reaction. What's the C-13 team doing next door?
They're terrified. Lieutenant Garrity said later that the agents in the next room were literally seconds from kicking the door in. They thought the silence meant Ippolito had been made and was about to be killed.
But the bluff worked.
The bluff worked. Sammy finally cracks a smile. He acknowledges the power play. He shakes his hand and he says, "Let's do business." The test was passed.
But Sammy wasn't quite done. He had one last test, and it wasn't for Ippolito.
No. It was for the civilian informant, the guy who first introduced Eduardo to Tony Romano.
This was maybe the most dangerous moment for any civilian involved in the operation.
Absolutely. Sammy takes the informant into a side room, and he pressures him. He threatens him, tries to force him to betray Tony Romano. The agent said he was put into the mangle, and again, the team next door was ready to burst in at any second.
But the informant, he holds his ground.
He holds his ground and delivers the most perfect, loyal response you could imagine. He refuses, and he says, "His people will shoot me. I will betray neither him nor the family."
The fam.
That unwavering loyalty, even under threat from Sammy, was the final piece of proof the cartel needed. If Romano's own people were that loyal, he had to be legit. They all celebrated with a bottle of champagne. The trust was finally completely sealed.
With that trust in place, the path was clear to the ultimate target. A high-ranking cartel member named Hernando Sanchez Anao.
Right. Anao was the one looking to set up a permanent, long-term drug route. He wanted to make Tony Romano the cartel's new gateway into the U.S. market. This was it. This was the final step to the actual source of the cocaine.
But getting that close immediately created a new, almost fatal problem. Anao demanded that Ippolito fly with him to Colombia to personally inspect a drug shipment at the source.
Which would have been a catastrophe. Ippolito would have been in the lion's den with absolutely no backup. In Colombia, the protection of the U.S. Justice Department means nothing. He would never have passed the scrutiny of the cartel's inner circle on their home turf.
But he couldn't just say no. That would look suspicious.
It would have destroyed a year's worth of trust. So he had to lean on his persona. He used his established mafia business excuse again. He claimed he had too many high-level disputes and operations in New York that he couldn't possibly leave. He framed it as, "I'm too important here to travel."
And Anao bought it.
Fortunately, he did. He probably saw Romano's need to stay in the U.S. as just more proof of his high status. So the operation continued. They were tapping Anao's phones, gathering more intel, and they were finally closing in. They just had to wait for the big shipment.
The waiting paid off. And that brings us to Section 5. The final trap and the unmasking. Confirmation arrives, the drugs are coming, but Hernando changes the plan at the last second.
It's another classic cartel move, a calculated test. Instead of the 5 tons of cocaine they had promised, Hernando sends a massive test load of 9 tons of marijuana.
9 tons!
Look
Just
at
to
that.
put that in perspective, a normal test load is tiny.
A normal test load is 2 kilos, maybe 10. Something you could afford to lose if it gets seized. 9 tons, that's nearly 10,000 kilograms of marijuana, worth between $21 and $22 million wholesale. That's not a test.
That's a statement.
It's a massive declaration of power and confidence. It shows that he now trusted Romano completely. He was betting millions that the mafia could handle it.
But C-13 can't let $22 million of drugs hit the street. When the ship arrives, they have this huge logistical problem. They have to move the 9 tons to their secure warehouse, but without breaking the official customs seal on the container.
Because if that seal is broken, the cartel knows immediately the shipment's been compromised. The whole illusion is shattered.
So how did they do it?
This is where the customs agent's expertise was just invaluable. The agent in charge, Phil Spinelli, confirmed they didn't cut the seal. They had to painstakingly pry the container door open at the hinges without warping the frame, take out the drugs, and then carefully reseal it so it looked completely untouched. It was forensic engineering in the service of deception.
Incredible. After confirming the contents, 272 boxes of marijuana Ippolito invites the gangsters to the warehouse for the big reveal.
This is the moment to get the final video and audio evidence. But more importantly, it's the moment for Ippolito to gain the ultimate leverage.
They stage the inspection perfectly.
Perfectly. Ippolito has one of his guys use a big bolt cutter to dramatically break the seal, even handing the cut seal to the gangsters as a souvenir. Then he takes out a pocket knife, cuts open the packages, and shows them their product. And the gangsters are just ecstatic. They think they've finally done it.
And this is when Tony Romano, the boss, makes his final move. He pretends to be furious about the change of plans.
It was pure tactical genius. He used that feigned anger to seize total control. He lays down the law. You tricked me. That's not how we work. You do what I say. I want 5 tons of cocaine. Only then will you get your marijuana. He was holding their $22 million shipment hostage.
That move created instant sheer panic. Monica and Willie needed that marijuana to pay off their debts. And this leads to the single most chilling moment in the entire investigation.
It's the detail that Ippolito said he carried with him long after it was all over. In a moment of absolute frantic desperation, Monica makes this shocking offer. She offers her own child as collateral for the drugs.
Her own child as security for a drug deal.
Ippolito said that moment gave him real chills. He understood right then the true depths of their desperation and the terrifying power the cartel held over them. I mean, if they're willing to use their own child as collateral, what would they do to a cop if they found one in their midst?
It's horrifying, but Ippolito holds firm. No cocaine, no marijuana.
He does. And the gangsters, with no other choice, finally agreed to arrange the cocaine shipment, and that was the final piece C-13 needed. They gave the order to execute the arrests.
February 3rd, 1993. Over a year after the operation started, the task force moves in.
They took down Willie and Monica first at the fake office in Floral Park. The reports say they were completely surprised and did not understand what was happening as armed agents stormed the place.
And then comes the final confrontation. The curtain call for Tony Romano. Ippolito has to dismantle the persona he spent a year building right in front of them.
He walks up to the captured couple. He's not the mafioso boss anymore. He reveals his identity. He just says, "As you see, I am a police officer."
And Willie, just emotionally shattered by it all, asks him, "How could you do this to me?"
And Ippolito's final response just draws the line in the sand between the law and the world he had to inhabit for a year.
It's so cold and direct.
He says, "Willie, you come to this country, smuggle drugs, and destroy human lives. I am a police officer detective. I enforce the law. You broke it. You are both arrested." And then he just turned and walked away. The illusion of Tony Romano was gone forever.
And the rest of the ring fell quickly after that.
Within 24 hours, Hernando and 6 of his accomplices were arrested. Eduardo, Monica, Willie, Hernando, all charged. They took down the top of the organization.
And not everyone was caught.
No, there were a few escapes. Magola, Ivan the Terrible's niece, fled back to Colombia before they could get her. And another high-ranking member, Mauro Trujillo, also escaped, and the FBI put out a public appeal to find him. But the core leadership and the operational structure of that entire smuggling pipeline were completely broken.
So when we step back and synthesize all of this, what's the big takeaway? This operation, it wasn't just good police work. It was a masterpiece of psychology and logistics.
Absolutely. The success hinged entirely on Ippolito's performance as Tony Romano. He didn't just act like a gangster. He anticipated their needs, their need for port access, for a scary reputation, and for shows of strength, like when he stared down Sammy.
And by creating this flawless, evidence-backed deception, from the cloned phones all the way to the Atlantic City ruse and the staged warehouse inspection, C-13 gathered this insurmountable mountain of video and audio evidence. They struck a huge blow against a cartel pipeline that really seemed invincible.
And the logistics they pulled off,
Mm-hmm.
prying open a sealed container and putting it back together, the cross-agency coordination for the Atlantic City trip.
Yeah.
It shows you that to beat organized crime at this level, law enforcement had to be even more organized, more meticulous, and frankly, more theatrical than the criminals themselves.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me, though, and it goes back to that moment with Monica and her child. This whole deep dive shows that even in this brutal, violent world of high-stakes crime, the ultimate currency, the most vulnerable point, is trust. Ippolito built that trust using a year of intricate lies.
And that trust was built on a foundation of their debt and their desperation. The operation's success reveals the horrifying cost of being part of an organization like that. The fact that someone like Monica was willing to sacrifice everything, to offer up her own child to settle a debt, it forces you to ask this really vital, chilling question that goes beyond the police work.
Here she is.
How far can absolute existential fear drive a person when they're faced with the unforgiving power of an organization like the Medellin Cartel? It reveals the full, soul-destroying reality of the world Ippolito managed to walk into and, thankfully, walk out of.
A question that still hangs over the legacy of the cartels today, something for you to mull over until our next deep dive.